for this initiative, for the dialogue, because actually a dialogue is needed with the missions here in Geneva between the convention and what's happening. And I think Ambassador Overblood very clearly showed how there are other international organizations that are acting on climate, but are they acting consistently with all the members? Uh, Objective, are we going along the same? Are we going along the same route? Are we going along the same route that led from Bali? I was of course in Bali, uh, through to Copenhagen through Poznan in Poland. We're going to through two EU countries on our way to Denmark when we have, and I'm looking forward to that opportunity. It all started for me actually here in Geneva. In 1989, I was assigned here as a not if not a young officer, at least a very junior one, and. The negotiations, I was telling my colleagues, the negotiations were divided between the Uruguay round and all other matters. And I was all the other matters. And all other matters included the preparation for UNCED, the preparation for all the negotiations for all the conventions, human rights. I'm also all of that in basket. And they say, every time they said climate change, Bernarditas, go and look at what that is, Tell us what it is all about. And so I started a very long involvement in the issue. And I think more awareness. And this morning, actually, I primed myself up by attending a very, very interesting presentation by Vice President Al Gore at the Théâtre du Le Mans on his view. He will make a good public relations man for climate, I'm sure. Uh, I'm getting to capacity building. Don't get nervous, Vice. Only to show that actually it is true. The convention, the UN Convention, Framework Convention on Climate Change, and its Kyoto Protocol are the only global legally binding instruments, of which all of us, almost without exception, are parties, are states parties. It's about 196 states parties. I think there are about 198 or 200 countries now in the world. It is science-based completely. All its principles, all its objectives, all its commitments, everything is science-based. So it's very clear, and in fact, it's the fourth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also based here in Geneva, that gave the impetus to the Bali meeting. And also, it is a very careful balance of differentiated responsibilities under the convention. If you want to move forward and achieve and do something together, really, to do something about climate change, it must be done within the convention. There is no other solution, to my mind. We have worked for 13 years. We're not starting from zero. We're not starting. We brought to Bali all the experiences that we have had during the last 13 years. On capacity building in particular, the capacity building under the convention should be actually more aptly called capacity strengthening. The developing countries first brought this, the decision adopted by Conference of the Parties on capacity building in 1998. We tabled it because we thought that capacity building should be driven by developing countries' needs. If you're going to build the capacity of somebody, at least you must ask that somebody what kind of capacity need does he have. And the aim is to render capacity building, therefore, activities fully responsive to the needs and using as much as possible, and that's why I say capacity strengthening, because there is practically no, and I'm sure all of us here know that, no country in the world today that has no capacity in some way or the other. Very many of the developing country experts, in fact, get their education, even and expertise also in other. So this is a global world, So we would, for instance, we had a capacity building framework that would encourage the use of local experts, that would encourage the use of local centers of influence, that would strengthen institution building within the country for understanding climate change. Because what is important, and Al Gore, like I said this morning, showed that very clearly, is understand what we can do, what is happening and what we can do. And that is the basic part of capacity building. In the convention, of course, we start by the science-based, because the capacity building is in cooperation, research, and systematic observation of climate. Article 9, dealing with the subsidiary body and scientific and technical advice of the convention, and extended to access to financial resources in development and transfer of technology, because these two, like you said, Ambassador, these two are the main, are the basic main building blocks for mitigation adaptation. If you don't have these two building blocks of financing and technology, and everybody's now realizing that we can all address these problems through technology. Adaptation. What is also most important to realize is the linkages, important linkages, like you said. And capacity building, of course, is the cross-cutting issue, as one would say, in these negotiations, cross-cutting issue that affects everything. But you see, developing countries, for instance, if you don't adapt and you are a victim of climate change, and this thing will go on for the next decade at least, even if we all stop breathing now, because we breathe out carbon dioxide, from what I understand, although there's a very small global warming potential, we still will have the adverse effects. You're quite right, Ambassador. We're still going to have to adapt to climate change. If you don't adapt, you don't develop. If you don't develop, you cannot mitigate. It's very clearly. So there is that linkage. And the capacity building is, of course, underlies all that linkage that there is. It's a cross-cutting issue. Now, it's very interesting to find out in Bali, you were referring to Bali, Excellency. And in Bali, we were there, and one of the three decisions, I was handling financial issues. My latest job now is leading the group of 77 in the ad hoc working group on long-term cooperative action, which I hope will continue until which I am afraid will continue until until Copenhagen. It is a very difficult ad hoc working group. But it was very interesting that the very last days of Bali, actually, there were three decisions that were not yet adopted. Knowledge transfer under this subsidiary body for implementation. National communications, very important. Very important. Without national communications in this convention, on what will you base all your actions? Mitigation, adaptation, anything, vulnerability assessment, you have to have inventories of emissions, you have that in national. So we did not adopt that. And the third was capacity building, quite interestingly enough. And so the developing countries said, we need to have decisions on this before we can act and adopt a Bali roadmap. I'm afraid that's the reason, Ambassador, that we kept everybody awake until the afternoon of Saturday in Bali when we were supposed. But that's par for the course for climate change negotiations. In Bangkok, we did the same thing. We ended up on a Saturday morning, and I think most negotiations here in Geneva also. I don't know if they extend. If I remember right, they do extend until the very early hours of the morning in usual practice.
It was in the
But but you see, there are decisions that are taken for capacity building. What capacity building really means is that we must share with each other, and that's why the dialogue is important. In information, in knowledge of how we are going to address this problem, how we can work together, given our respective capabilities, on the basis of equity. The first principle of the convention is indeed the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, but one often forgets that the principle starts by saying, on the basis of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities. And that is how we're going to see. And accordingly, therefore, the principle continues, developed countries should take the lead in addressing climate change and its adverse effects because of this principle. And the principle is not the principle only of the convention, as you all know, it's principle 7 of the Rio UNCED principle. Um, and therefore it's not, has not been invented to serve the purposes of the convention. It's an internationally agreed overarching guideline, if you like, principle of the convention. Technology and financing are, of course, the important demographics. But I think we've moved a little bit far from just being, as you said, ambassador, how do you say it, responsible to our taxpayers. We've moved far from that already in the convention around those lines. In fact, we're talking of new and additional resources. We have to work together very hard in order to address this problem. And we have to do it together. And that's why I said that the dialogue and the work that's being done in the international organizations would be very important here, because they are inextricably linked, all these issues. Development is important, because without development you cannot do anything to address climate change. If you are just, if you are thinking only of survival. And I think the professor, my last posting, in fact, I had a mission in Nairobi, in Kenya, and the professor mentioned Lake Naivasha, very close to my heart. I've seen it. And indeed, unless we fully realize what are the economic consequences and environmental damage done by all our activities, and change it, not only in terms of production, but also consumption, in particular consumption. We are always looking at the production side. What about the consumption side? I was in Bangkok, lovely hotel, big place. Morning breakfast, overlooking the garden, swimming pools. Beautiful sunshine outside. I was freezing inside. Plus all the electric lights were on. Very simple things we can all do, and we must all do. And we are looking into that in the convention, but awareness raising is most important. And capacity building also extends to awareness raising. So capacity building is really an underlying issue, but everything else in the convention is together. And I think what we are looking at in Bangkok, what we are looking at when we started the sessions in Bangkok, like you said, is not really a prioritized set of issues. It is numbered, it has to be numbered. It's not a priority because they are all together. You must work them all together. You cannot have mitigation without financing. You cannot. Adaptation and mitigation are not separate. When you adapt, you mitigate. When you mitigate, you can also adapt. And when you develop, you can do both. And when you need development, you need, cooperation in terms of financing and collaboration in terms of technology, because there is the answer. And I think that's, I'm not going into the details of the different, especially the very political issues that arise in Bangkok. I just want to give the message that dialogue is important, transparency is important, cooperation is important, and we must all do what we can. Maybe I'm still being encouraged by Vice President Al Gore, although he did not say the new administration in the United States will do anything about this. He did express the hope, and he said, you know what he said? And my American partners are really telling me this, my U.S. partners, because you are quite right. In Bali, the move was really towards to getting everybody into the climate change plan. He mentioned some 800, nearly 900, how do they call it, counties in the United States that have already taken on for themselves. Not only the big states like California and other eastern states, seaboard states also, they've taken for themselves the Kyoto Protocol targets. What we must remind ourselves also of the Kyoto Protocol targets for the first commitment period are peanuts compared to what the science tells us we must do. And that's why we must also work together to do that. I thank you very much.